The Double Life. A story of betrayal, justice, and healing. How does a woman rebuild her life after discovering her husband of 22 years as a bigamist with a secret family? This is the story of Catherine Morrison's journey from devastating betrayal to hard-won justice and unexpected healing, and just like the phoenix, she rose from the ashes. The discovery. The parking garage at Denver International Airport was where my world ended, though I didn't know it yet. I was sitting in my Honda Civic, waiting for my husband Michael to return from what he'd told me was a 3-day business conference in Phoenix. Flight 1247, arriving at Gate B23 at 6:35 p.m. I had memorized the details because I planned to surprise him with his favorite Thai takeout and a quiet evening together. Instead, I watched him walk through the arrivals area holding hands with a woman I'd never seen before. Behind them, 2 children, maybe 8 and 10 years old, were pulling wheeled suitcases and chattering excitedly about something. At first, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. Michael Morrison, my husband of 22 years, helping a strange woman with her luggage. Michael, who had told me he was traveling alone, ruffling the hair of a little boy who looked exactly like him at that age. I sat frozen in my car as they loaded into a silver SUV I didn't recognize. Michael kissed the woman, not a friendly peck, but the kind of kiss you give someone you're coming home to. Then he buckled the little girl into a booster seat with the practiced efficiency of a father who'd done it hundreds of times. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the car. I followed them at a distance, my mind cycling through increasingly desperate explanations. Maybe it was his sister? His cousin? Some relative I'd never met? But Michael was an only child, and I'd met every member of his small extended family over the past 2 decades. I followed the SUV through suburban Denver to a neighborhood I'd never seen before. They pulled into the driveway of a 2-story colonial house with a swing set in the backyard and Christmas lights still twinkling around the front door even though it was February. I parked across the street and watched Michael Morrison, my husband, unlock the front door of a house I'd never seen with a key I didn't know existed. I watched him carry in suitcases and help the children hang up their coats. I watched him move through that house like he belonged there, like it was home. Because it was home, his other home, with his other family. I sat in that car for 3 hours, watching through the windows as Michael played board games with the children, helped the woman cook dinner, and settled into an evening routine that was clearly well established. This wasn't an affair. This wasn't a business trip gone wrong or a moment of weakness. Investigation begins. I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to reconcile what I'd seen with everything I thought I knew about my life. Our house, I reminded myself bitterly, felt like a museum of lies. Every photograph on the mantel, every piece of furniture we'd chosen together, every memory I'd treasured suddenly felt contaminated. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, listening to the silence where Michael's breathing should have been. He'd texted me around 11 p.m., flight delayed, hotel for the night, home tomorrow evening. Lies, all lies. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I needed answers, and I needed them before Michael came home with whatever story he'd prepared to explain his absence. I started with his home office, a room I rarely entered because Michael had always been particular about his workspace. Now I understood why. The filing cabinet was locked, but I found the key taped under his desk drawer, a hiding place that would have been laughably obvious if I'd ever thought to look. What I found inside those files destroyed the last shreds of the life I thought I'd been living. Marriage certificate to Elena Rodriguez Morrison, dated June 15, 2018. Birth certificates for Isabella Morrison and Diego Morrison. Insurance policies listing Elena and the children as beneficiaries. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of. Credit cards in Michael's name with billing addresses I didn't recognize. A complete paper trail of a completely separate existence. The most devastating document was a handwritten letter from Elena, dated just 2 months earlier. "MIA more, the children are so excited about Christmas with their papa. Isabella drew you a picture of our family for your office. She made sure to draw you with your big smile, the one you get when you're home with us. Diego has been practicing the song he wants to sing for you on guitar. We are so blessed to have you in our lives. I know it's difficult sometimes, managing everything, but you are such a wonderful husband and father. Te amo para siempre." I read that letter 5 times before I understood what the burning sensation in my chest was. It wasn't just heartbreak or betrayal. It was rage. Pure, white-hot rage. Michael wasn't just cheating on me. He was living a completely authentic life with Elena and their children while treating me like a side character in my own marriage. Elena's letter spoke of a man who was fully present, engaged, loving, everything Michael had become increasingly distant about in our relationship over the past few years. Now I knew why. He'd been saving all his emotional energy for his real family. Confronting the truth, Michael came home that Tuesday evening with flowers and an elaborate story about flight delays and a client dinner that ran late. He kissed my cheek and asked about my day with the same distracted affection he'd shown me for months. I had spent the day copying every document in his files, photographing every piece of evidence, and preparing for a conversation that would end our marriage. But I needed to hear him say it. How was Phoenix? I asked as we sat down to the dinner I'd made, his favorite meal, maybe for the last time. Oh, you know how these conferences are. Boring presentations, networking events, the usual. What hotel did you stay at? The Marriott downtown. Why? Another lie. According to the documents I'd found, Michael didn't even have a conference in Phoenix. He'd been in Denver the entire time, living with Elena and the children in their house with the swing set. Michael, I said carefully, is there anything you want to tell me about your trip? He looked up from his plate, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? Guilt? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Not really. Pretty standard business trip. Why do you ask? I excused myself and returned with the folder of documents I'd copied. I set it on the table between us and watched his face go white. I followed you home from the airport yesterday, I said quietly. From your real home, to your real family. Michael stared at the folder like it was a bomb. His mouth opened and closed several times without any sound coming out. How long? I asked. Catherine, I can explain. How long? The kids are. Isabella is 8, Diego is 10. So at least 11 years. 11 years, Michael. He nodded miserably. Are you legally married to her? Another nod. So what does that make me? Catherine, please, it's complicated. No, I said, standing up. It's actually very simple. You're a bigamist. You committed fraud when you married me, and you've been committing fraud every day since then. Elena thinks she's your only wife, doesn't she? Michael's silence was answer enough. Get out, I said. Catherine, please, let me explain. Get out. The words tore out of me with such force that Michael actually flinched. Get out of this house right now, and don't come back. This is my house too. Actually, it's not. Check your documents more carefully next time you decide to ruin someone's life. This house is in my name only, bought with my inheritance from my father. You have no legal claim to it whatsoever. Michael left that night, and I haven't spoken to him since. But my journey was just beginning. Building my case. The next morning, I did something I'd never thought I'd need to do. I hired a private investigator and a criminal defense attorney. Sarah Chen, the Pi, was a former police detective who specialized in marital fraud cases. She was blunt, thorough, and exactly what I needed. How much do you want to know? She asked during our first meeting. Everything. I want to know how he managed this, how long it's been going on, whether there are other women, other families. I want to understand who I've been married to. What Sarah uncovered over the next 3 weeks was both worse and better than I'd imagined. Worse because the deception was even more elaborate than I'd realized. Better because there was enough evidence to potentially send Michael to prison. Michael had been living this double life by exploiting his job as a regional sales manager for a medical device company. His territory covered Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, which gave him a legitimate reason to travel frequently. He'd told Elena he was divorced and that his ex-wife was bitter and unstable, which explained why she could never call him at home or meet any of his friends. He'd been financially supporting both households by inflating his business expenses and skimming money from client entertainment accounts. He'd also taken out credit cards in my name without my knowledge, a fact I discovered when Sarah ran a comprehensive credit check. The most damaging evidence was the fraudulent marriage certificate. Michael had married Elena in Las Vegas using fake divorce papers that claimed his marriage to me had been dissolved. Not only was he a bigamist, he'd committed document fraud and identity theft to do it. Catherine, Sarah said during our final meeting, you have enough evidence here for multiple felony charges. Wire fraud, identity theft, bigamy, falsifying legal documents. If you press charges, Michael is looking at serious jail time. What about Elena and the children? That's the hardest part of cases like this. Elena is as much a victim as you are. She had no idea Michael was already married. The children. They're going to lose the only father they've ever known. I spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with that knowledge. Elena hadn't chosen to be part of this deception. Those children, Isabella and Diego, were innocent. Did they deserve to have their lives destroyed because their father was a criminal? But then I thought about my 22 years of marriage, about all the times Michael had lied to my face, about the future I'd planned that was built on a foundation of fraud. I thought about Elena's letter, about how she believed she had a devoted husband when she actually had half of a man who was deceiving everyone in his life. We both deserved to know the truth, and Michael needed to face consequences for the confrontation with Elena. Sarah had given me Elena's work address. She was a nurse at Children's Hospital of Colorado. I struggled with whether to contact her at all. Part of me wanted to let the legal system handle everything. But I kept thinking about that letter, about her obvious love for Michael and her belief in their family. She deserved to hear the truth from another woman, not from lawyers and police officers. I waited in the hospital parking lot after Elena's shift ended, my heart pounding as I watched her walk to her car. She was beautiful in a way that was completely different from me, petite and dark-haired where I was tall and blonde, with an energy and vibrancy that made me understand why Michael had been drawn to her. "Elena?" I called out as she reached her car. She turned, and I saw her smile falter as she took in my expression. "My name is Catherine Morrison," I said. "I'm Michael's wife." The color drained from her face. "That's impossible. Michael is divorced." He showed me the papers. The papers were fake. "Michael and I have been married for 22 years. We were married long before he met you." Elena gripped her car door handle like it was the only thing keeping her upright. No, that's not, he wouldn't." I pulled out a folder with copies of our marriage certificate, photos of Michael and me from our wedding, our joint tax returns from the past 5 years. "I'm so sorry, Elena. I know this is devastating. But you need to know the truth." Elena looked through the documents with shaking hands, and I watched her world crumble in real time. It was like watching myself in that airport parking garage all over again. "The children," she whispered. "Isabella and Diego, they adore their father. How'd I tell them?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But they deserve honesty, and you deserve better than being married to a man who's been lying to you about the most basic facts of his life." Elena looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "Did you know about us? I found out 3 weeks ago. I've been married to a stranger, Elena. Everything I thought I knew about my husband was a lie." We stood in that parking lot for over an hour, 2 women whose lives had been shattered by the same man. Elena told me about their courtship, their wedding, her dreams for their future. I told her about Michael's increasing distance in our marriage, his frequent trips, the way he'd become like a ghost in our house. He was never fully present with me, I realized as we talked. For years, I thought something was wrong with me, that I wasn't interesting enough or loving enough to hold his attention. Now I know he was saving all his energy for you and the children. "But he wasn't fully present with us either," Elena said quietly. "He would disappear for days at a time, and he could never explain where he was going or why. I thought it was work, but there were always these gaps, these inconsistencies. By the time we parted that night, Elena and I had formed an unlikely alliance. We were both victims of Michael's deception, and we both deserved justice." The legal battle. I pressed charges: wire fraud, identity theft, bigamy, document falsification. The district attorney's office was enthusiastic about prosecuting what they called one of the most elaborate marital fraud cases they'd seen. Michael hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and tried to negotiate a plea deal, but I refused to agree to anything that didn't include jail time. He had stolen 22 years of my life and 11 years of Elena's life. He had emotionally damaged 2 children who would now grow up knowing their father was a criminal. There had to be consequences. The civil case was even more satisfying. Michael's employer fired him immediately when the charges became public. Apparently, using company resources to commit fraud was grounds for termination. His pension, his stock options, his health insurance, all gone. Elena filed for divorce in Colorado, and I filed for annulment in Nevada, arguing that our marriage had been invalid from the moment Michael committed bigamy. Both proceedings went smoothly once the criminal charges provided documentation of Michael's lies. The financial settlement was complex but ultimately favorable. Michael had to repay every cent he'd stolen from me, including the fraudulent credit cards. Elena and I split his remaining assets, with priority given to ensuring the children's education funds remained intact. But the most important victory was psychological. For 22 years, Michael had controlled the narrative of our relationship. He'd made me feel like I was asking too much when I wanted attention, like I was being unreasonable when I questioned his absences, like I was the problem in our marriage. Now everyone knew the truth. His coworkers, his friends, his family, Alina's family, everyone understood that Michael Morrison was a fraud and a liar who had systematically deceived everyone who loved him. The aftermath. Michael pled guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison plus 5 years of probation. He was also ordered to pay restitution to both Elena and me, and to undergo mandatory psychological counseling. Elena and I kept in touch throughout the legal proceedings. Our relationship was complicated. We had both loved the same man, been deceived by the same man, been damaged by the same man. But we had also found strength in supporting each other through the aftermath. The children struggled, as expected. Isabella, the younger one, had a harder time understanding why their father had gone away. Diego, who was older, asked more difficult questions about lies and truth and whether he could ever trust adults again. Elena enrolled both of them in therapy, and slowly, they began to heal. It's strange, Elena told me during one of our coffee meetings 6 months after Michael's sentencing. I miss the man I thought he was, but I don't miss the man he actually was. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. I was grieving the loss of 22 years of what I'd believed was a marriage, while simultaneously feeling relief that the constant low-level anxiety and confusion were finally gone. I no longer had to wonder why my husband seemed distracted or unavailable. I no longer had to question whether I was asking too much or expecting too little. The truth, even when it was devastating, was cleaner than the lies. Specific type of grief that comes from losing not just a relationship, but your entire understanding of what that relationship had been. I keep having moments where I remember something sweet he did, Elena told me during one of our talks, and then I have to remind myself that he was probably coming from your house when he did it, or he was about to leave for your house afterward. Every anniversary, every holiday, every special moment, I agreed. I have to wonder now which family he was really thinking about. But gradually, those conversations became less about Michael and more about our own journeys forward. Elena was discovering her strength as a single mother. I was learning to build a life. 2 years later, Michael was released from prison after serving 18 months of his sentence. I heard through Elena that he'd moved to Arizona to be near his elderly mother and was working in a warehouse, the only job he could find with a criminal record. Elena had started dating again, a pediatrician at her hospital who was patient with her trust issues and wonderful with Isabella and Diego. The children were thriving in therapy and had begun to understand that their father's crimes weren't a reflection of their worth. As for me, I surprised everyone by going back to school. At 57, I enrolled in a master's program in art therapy, combining my rediscovered love of painting with a desire to help others heal from trauma. My thesis project focused on the specific challenges faced by women who discover their marriages were fraudulent, a population that, I'd learned, was larger than most people realized. The program introduced me to Dr. James Wright, a psychology professor who was researching the long-term effects of intimate partner deception. Our professional relationship gradually became personal, built on a foundation of shared intellectual interests and mutual respect. James understood that I needed to move slowly, that trust was something I would rebuild gradually. He didn't pressure me to merge our lives or make commitments I wasn't ready for. Instead, he simply showed up consistently, honestly, completely, everything Michael had never been. The difference, I told Elena during one of our now monthly coffee dates, is that James sees me as a complete person, not as a supporting character in his story. He wants to know what I think, what I dream about, what I need. It's like learning a new language. Elena smiled. It sounds like you're learning to trust yourself again, not just him. She was right. The most important relationship I'd rebuilt wasn't with James or even with Elena. It was with myself. For 22 years, I'd defined myself in relation to Michael, as his wife, his partner, his complement. I'd gradually given up pieces of myself to maintain the harmony of a relationship that, it turned out, had never actually existed. Now I knew who Catherine Morrison was when she wasn't trying to please someone else or accommodate someone else's needs. I knew what I liked, what I wanted, what I wouldn't tolerate. I knew the difference between compromise and self-erasure. The final lesson. 3 years after that devastating night in the airport parking lot, I can honestly say that discovering Michael's double life was both the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. The worst part was obvious. The betrayal, the humiliation, the loss of 2 decades of shared history, the shattering realization that I'd never actually known the man I'd married. But the best part was subtler and more profound. I learned that I was strong enough to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I learned that healing was possible even from the most devastating betrayal. I learned that sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, really does set you free. Michael had stolen 22 years of my life, but he hadn't stolen my future. In fact, by forcing me to confront the reality of who he was and what our marriage had actually been, he'd inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible: the chance to build a life based on authenticity instead of illusion. Elena and I still laugh about the irony. Michael had worked so hard to keep us apart, to maintain his elaborate deception, but in the end, his lies brought us together and made us both stronger than we'd ever been while living in his web of deceit. He probably thought he was so clever, Elena said recently, managing 2 wives and 2 lives without either of us catching on. But he wasn't managing anything, I replied. He was just running from the truth. And eventually, the truth caught up with him. The truth always does. Epilogue. Moving forward. Today, as I write this story in my sun-filled studio while Sadie naps at my feet, I'm preparing for my wedding to James next month. It will be a small ceremony. Just close friends and family, Elena and her children, my sister and her family. Elena will be reading a poem she wrote about second chances and the courage to trust again. It seems fitting that the woman who shared my greatest betrayal will also witness my new beginning. I no longer think of myself as a victim of Michael's crimes, though that's certainly what I was. Now I think of myself as a survivor who refused to let someone else's lies define the rest of her story. The phoenix doesn't rise from ashes because the fire was easy to endure. She rises because she discovers that what she thought would destroy her actually revealed her true strength. In my art therapy practice, I work with women who are rebuilding their lives after intimate partner betrayal. I tell them what Elena and I learned the hard way. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. Healing is about integrating the truth of your experience into a new understanding of who you were and what you deserve. Michael Morrison stole 22 years of my life, but Catherine Morrison, the real Catherine Morrison, not the accommodating shadow I'd become, has many years ahead of her. And this time, I'm living them on my own terms, surrounded by people who see me clearly and love me completely. The truth really did set me free. It just took a while to understand that freedom was what I'd been looking for all along. Catherine Morrison completed her master's degree in art therapy at age 59 and now runs a private practice specializing in trauma recovery. She and Elena Rodriguez remain close friends, and their children, now young adults, consider each other family. Michael Morrison served his full sentence and now lives quietly in Arizona. He has had no contact with either family since his release from prison. Blank. Blank. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment and share. The phoenix is a legendary mythical bird who rises from the ashes to be reborn. It represents rebirth, renewal and resilience, to inspire embracing change and rising above adversity with strength and grace.